Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to our buddy read of Mr. Scarborough's Family by Anthony Trollope, his last major novel that was being serialized when he died, and he never lived to see it as a book. And all the action in the novel, we're almost done, and all the action of the novel is largely over with one plate really left in the air. We're dealing now with a flurry of marriages, a flurry of arranging things. But there's one thing that hasn't been arranged in the minds of two of the young men in this story. And they converge on the same spot in the chapter that we're reading today, in this chapter. One of those young men is Mountjoy Scarborough, who is Mr. Scarborough's heir, and has just come into the wealthy property of Tretton Park, having at first been disinherited by his father, and then he and his brother paying off the massive amount of debt that he owed to creditors, to moneylenders. That debt was paid off, and then Mr. Scarborough announced that he is, in fact, legitimate, so he will inherit Tretton Park. But Mountjoy doesn't want to inherit Tretton Park alone. He, for years, just assumed that he was going to marry his first cousin, Florence Mountjoy. Even though when he broaches the subject with her, when he's first disinherited at the beginning of the book, she makes it clear that that was never going to happen. That was never her intent. She never loved him. Fond of him, sure, but never loved him, was never going to marry him. That was a rude shock to him on top of all the other shocks that he had. And it was made even worse by the fact that she told him, he quickly divined that the person she was going to marry was a friend of his, Harry Annesley, what Trollope calls the hero of this novel. And now that Mountjoy is inherited, he is thinking, well, none of this means anything unless she is here to rule over the house and to cure me of my gambling addiction. That's what he's thinking. And Harry Annesley is thinking, as we saw in the last chapter, that it's ridiculous that Florence's mother is putting such weird strictures on them getting married. Harry is now the heir to Buston Hall. He has a generous allowance. There's no reason they can't get married right away. And yet Mrs. Mountjoy is saying, no, wait 3 years. He's not allowed to see you for an entire year. You aren't allowed to communicate except... The more Harry thinks about it, the less he likes that. And so, in this chapter, those two men converge down in Cheltenham. They converge at Montpelier Place, Mrs. Mountjoy's home. So here we're going to read this next chapter. Mr. Scarborough is buried. When Mr. Scarborough died, and when he had been buried, his son Mountjoy was left alone at Tretton, living in a very desolate manner. Till the day of the funeral, Merton, the doctor, had remained with him, and his aunt, Miss Scarborough. But when the old squire had been laid in his grave, they both departed. Miss Scarborough was afraid of her nephew, and could not look forward to living comfortably at the big house. I wonder where she goes. She's probably generously provided for, probably has a house of her own. And Dr. Merton had the general work of his life to call him away. You might as well stay for another week, Mountjoy had said to him, but Merton had felt that he could not remain at Tretton without some special duty, and so he too went his way. So Mountjoy's all of a sudden alone in the big house. He's got servants, but nobody there, nobody that he knows. The funeral had been very strange. Augustus refused to come and stand at his father's grave. Considering all things, I had rather decline, he had written to Mountjoy. Other guests, none were invited except the tenants. They came in a body, for the squire had been noted among them as a liberal landlord. But a crowd of tenants does not in any way make up that look of family sorrow which is expected at the funeral of such a man as Mr. Scarborough. Mountjoy was there, and stood through the ceremony speechless, almost sullen. He went down to the church behind the body with Merton, and then walked away from the ground without having uttered a syllable. But during the ceremony he had seen that which had caused him to be sullen. Mr. Samuel Hart had been there, and Mr. Tyrrwhit. His moneylenders have gone to the burial and are there in the crowd. And there was a man whom he called his friend, as connected with the names of Evans and Cook, and Mr. Spicer, and Mr. Richard Juniper. He knew them all as they stood there round the grave, not in decorous funereal array, but as strangers who had strayed into the ceremony. He could not but feel, as he looked at them, and they at him, that they had come to look after their interest. Their heavy interest on the money which had been fraudulently repaid to them. He knew that they had parted with their bonds, but he knew also that almost all that was now his would have been theirs, had they not been cheated into believing that he, Mountjoy Scarborough, was not, and never would be, Scarborough of Tretton Park. They said nothing as they stood there, and did not in any way interrupt the ceremony. But they looked at Montjoy as they were standing, and their looks disconcerted him terribly. As well they should. How tawdry. He had declared that he would walk back to the house, which was not above 2 miles distant from the graveyard, and therefore, when the funeral was over, there was no carriage to take him. But he knew that the men would dog his steps as he walked. He had only just got within the precincts of the park when they all saw him. But Mr. Tyrwhitt was by himself and came up to him. "What are you going to do, Captain Scarborough?" he said, "as to our claims?" "You have no claims that I'm aware of," he said roughly. "Oh, yes, Captain Scarborough, we have claims, certainly. You've come up to the front lately with a deal of luck. I don't begrudge it, for one. But I have claims. I and those other gentlemen. We have claims. You'll have to admit that." They don't. They don't. In law, they don't. They signed away their claims knowingly. "Send in the documents. Mr. Barry is acting as my lawyer. He is Mr. Gray's partner, and is now taking the lead share in all the business." "I know Mr. Barry well. A very sharp gentleman is Mr. Barry." "I cannot enter into conversation with yourself at such a time as this." "We are sorry to trouble you, but then our interests are so pressing. What do you mean to do, Captain Scarborough? That's the question." "Yes, with the estate," said Mr. Samuel Hart, coming up and joining them. Of the lot of the men, Mr. Samuel Hart was the most distasteful to Montjoy. He had last seen his Jew persecutor at Monaco, and had then, as he thought, been grossly insulted by him. "What are you after, Captain?" To this Montjoy made no answer, but Hart, walking a step or two in advance, turned upon his heel and looked at the park around him. "Tidy sort of place, ain't it, Tyrwhitt, for a gentleman to hang up his hat, when we're told that he's a bastard and not worth a shilling?" "I had nothing to do with all of that," said Montjoy. "You and Mr. Tyrwhitt held my acceptances for certain sums of money. They have, I believe, been paid in full." "Oh, no, they ain't. They ain't been paid in full at all. You know they ain't." As he said this, Mr. Hart walked on in front and stood in the pathway, facing Montjoy. "How can you have the cheek to say we've been paid in full? You know it ain't true." "Evans and Crook haven't been paid so far," said a voice from behind. "More ain't Spicer," said another voice, them all piping up. "Captain Scarborough, I haven't been paid in full," said Mr. Juniper, advancing to the front. "You don't mean to tell me that my £500 have been paid in full? You've ruined me, Captain Scarborough. I was to have been married to a young lady with a large fortune, and you're Mr. Gray's niece, and it was to have been broken off altogether because of your bad treatment. Do you mean to assert that I have been paid in full?" "If you've got any document, take it to Mr. Barry." "No, I won't. I won't take it to any lawyer. I'll take it right before the court and expose you. My name is Juniper, and I've never parted with a morsel of paper that has your name to it." "Then no doubt you'll get your money," said the captain. "I thought, gentlemen, you were to allow me to be the spokesman on this occasion," said Mr. Tyrwhitt. "We certainly cannot do any good if we attack the captain all at once. Now, Captain Scarborough, we don't want to be uncivil." "You showed up at the burial of the man's father." "Uncivil be blowed," said Mr. Hart. "I want to get my money, and I mean to have it. I agree as you was to speak, Mr. Tyrwhitt, but I means to be spoken up for, and if no one else can do it, I can do it myself. Is we to have any settlements made to us, or is we to go to law?" "I can only refer you to Mr. Barry," said Montjoy, walking on very rapidly. He thought that when he reached the house he might be able to enter in and leave them out, and he thought also that, if he kept them on the trot, he would thus prevent them from attacking him with many words. Evans and Crook were already lagging behind, and Mr. Spicer was giving signs of being hard pressed. Even Hart, who was younger than the others, was fat and short, and already showed that he would have to halt if he made many speeches. "Barry be damned!" exclaimed Hart. "You see how it is, Captain Scarborough," said Tyrwhitt, who doesn't appear to have any trouble keeping up. "Your father, as has just been laid to rest in hopes of a happy resurrection, was a very peculiar gentleman." "The most infernal swindler I ever heard tell of," said Hart. "I don't wish to say a word disrespectful," continued Tyrwhitt, "but he had his own notions. He said you were illegitimate, didn't he now?" "I can only refer you to Mr. Barry," said Montjoy. "And he said that Mr. Augustus was to have it all. And he proved his words, didn't he now? And then he made out that, if so, our deeds weren't worth the paper they were written on. Isn't it all true, what I'm saying? And then, when we'd taken what small sums of money he chose to offer us, £100,000, just to save ourselves from ruin, then he comes up and says you are the heir, as legitimate as anybody else, and are to have all the property. And he proves that too. What are we to think about it?" "That you were outsmarted," There was nothing left for Mountjoy Scarborough but to make the pace as good as possible. Mr. Hart tried once again to stop their progress by standing in the captain's path, but could only do this sufficiently at each stoppage to enable him to express his horror with various interjections. "Oh, laws, that such a liar has ever been buried." You can't do anything by being disrespectful, Mr. Hart," said Tyrrwhit. What he means to do?" ejaculated Spicer. "Mr. Spicer," said Mountjoy, "I mean to leave it all in the hands of Mr. Barry. If you will believe me, no good can be done by any of you in hunting me across the park." "Are you a bastard or aren't you?" exclaimed Hart. "No, Mr. Hart, I am not." "Then pay us what you owe us. You ain't a-going to say as you don't owe us." "Mr. Tyrrwhit," said the captain, "it is of no use my answering Mr. Hart, because he is angry." "Angry? By George, I'm angry. I'd like to pull that old sinner's bones out of the ground." "But to you I can say that Mr. Barry will be better able to tell you than I am what can be done by me to defend my property." "Captain Scarborough," said Mr. Tyrrwhit wildly, "we had your name, you know. We did have your name. You don't any more. You don't any more. And my father bought those bonds back." "Oh, laws, he calls himself a gentleman." "I have nothing further to say to you now, gentlemen, and can only refer you to Mr. Barry. The path on which they were walking had brought them to the corner of a garden wall, through which a door opened into the garden. Luckily, at that moment, it occurred to Mountjoy that there was a bolt on the other side of the gate, and he entered in quickly and bolted the door. Mr. Tyrrwhit was left on the other side, and was joined by his companions as quickly as their failing breath enabled them to do so. "He's gone. He's a go," said Mr. Hart, striking the door violently with the handle of his stick. "He had nothing for it but to leave us when we attacked him altogether," said Mr. Tyrrwhit. "If you had left it to me, he would have told us what he intended to do. You, Mr. Hart, had not so much cause to be angry as you had received a considerable sum for interest, including a bit out of Tyrrwhit's sum." Then Mr. Hart turned upon Mr. Tyrrwhit and abused him all the way back to their inn. But it was pleasant to see how these commercial gentlemen, all engaged in the natural course of trade, expressed their violent indignation not so much as to their personal losses, but as to the commercial dishonesty generally of which the Scarboroughs, father and son, had been and were to be able to be guilty. They don't think of themselves as being evil. Mountjoy, when he reached the house of which he was now the only occupant beside the servants, stood for an hour in the dining room with his back toward the fire, thinking of his position. He had many things to which to think. In the first place, there were these pseudo-creditors who had just attacked him in his own park with much acrimony. He endeavored to comfort himself by telling himself that they were certainly pseudo-creditors, to whom he did not, in fact, owe a penny. Might be nice if Tretton Park had a couple of men. Usually landed estates of even moderate sizes had a few men who could be whistled up in a hurry. Gardeners, landsmen, groundskeepers, something like that. Men who could be whistled up with forks and staves to get people off the property. Mr. Barry could deal with them. But then his conscience reminded him that they had, in truth, been cheated by his father for his benefit. For every pound which they had received, they would have claimed 3 or 4. But they would no doubt have cheated him. But how was he now to measure the extent of his father's fraud against that of his creditors? And though it would have been right in him to resist the villainy of those Jews, read moneylenders, please, to spare yourself the trouble, he had felt that it was not fit that he should escape from their fangs altogether by his father's deceit. He had not become so dead to honor, but that noblesse oblige did still live within his bosom. And yet there was nothing that he could do to absolve his bosom. The income of the estate was nearly clear, the money brought in by the late sales having all but sufficed to give these gentlemen that which his father had chosen to pay them. But was he sure of that income? He had just now asserted boldly that he was the legitimate heir to the property, but did he know that he was so? Could he believe his father? Had not Mr. Grey asserted that he would not accept the latter evidence? Was he not sure that Augustus intended to proceed against him, and was he not aware that nothing could be called his own till that lawsuit should have been decided? If that should be given against him, then these harpies would have been treated only too well. Then there would be no question at any rate by him as to what noblesse oblige might require of him. He could take no immediate steps in that regard to them, and therefore the moment drove the trouble from his mind. But what should he do with himself as his future life? To be persecuted and abused by these wretched men, as had this morning been his fate, would be intolerable. Could he shut himself up from Mr. Samuel Hart and still live in England? And then could he face the clubs, if the clubs would be kind enough to re-elect him? And then there came a dark frown across his brow as he bethought himself that even at that moment his heart was longing to once more be among the cards. Could he not escape to Monaco, and there be happy among the gambling tables? Mr. Hart would surely not follow him there, and he would be free from the surveillance of that double blackguard, his brother's servant, and his father's spy. Right. Augustus's agent won't be there, but Mr. Hart's already followed you once to Monte Carlo. He could easily do it again. But after all, as he declared to himself, it did not altogether turn on the final answer which he might get from Florence Mountjoy. Could Florence be brought to accede to his wishes, he thought that he might still live happily, respectably, and in such a manner that his name might go down to posterity not altogether blasted. If Florence would consent to live at Tretton, then he could remain there. He thought it over as he stood there with his back to the fire, and he told himself that with Florence the first year would be possible, and that after the first year the struggle would cease to be a struggle. He knew himself. He declared, and he made all manner of excuses for his former vicious life, basing them all on the hardness of her treatment of him. He did not know himself, and such assurances were vain. But buoyed up by such assurances, he resolved that his future fate must be in her hands, and that her word alone could suffice either to destroy him or to save him. Delusional thinking. Thinking thus of his future life, he resolved that he would go at once to Cheltenham and throw himself, and what of Tretton belonged to him, at the girl's feet. Nor could he endure himself to rest another night at Tretton till he had done so. He started at once, and got late to Gloucester, where he slept, and on the next morning at 11 o'clock was at Cheltenham, on his way to Montpellier Terrace. He at once asked for Florence, but circumstances so arranged themselves that he first found himself closeted with her mother. Mrs. Mountjoy was delighted, and yet shocked to see him. "My poor brother," she said, "and he was buried only yesterday." Such explanation as Mountjoy could give was given. He soon made the whole tenor of his thoughts intelligible to her. Yes, Tretton was his, at least he supposed so. As to his future life he could say nothing. It must depend on Florence. He thought that if she would promise to become at once his wife, there would be no more gambling. He felt it to be incumbent on him to come and tell her so. Mrs. Mountjoy, frightened by the thorough blackness of his apparel, and by the sternness of his manner, had not a word to say to him in opposition. "Be gentle with her," she said, as she led the way to the room in which Florence was found. "Your cousin has come to see you," she said, "has come immediately after the funeral. I hope you will be gracious to him." Then she closed the door, and the two were alone together. "Florence," he said. "Mountjoy, we hardly expected to see you here so soon. Where the heart strays, the body is apt to follow. I could speak to no one. I could do nothing. I could hope and pray for nothing till I had seen you." "You cannot depend on me like that," she answered. "I do depend on you, and most entirely. No human being depended more thoroughly on another. It is not my fortune that I have come to offer you, or simply my love, but in very truth my soul." "Mountjoy, that is wicked." "Then wicked let it be. It is true. Tretton, by singular circumstances, is all my own, free of debt. At any rate, I and others believe it to be so." "Tretton being your own can make no difference." "I told you that I had not come to offer you my fortune," and he almost scowled at her as he spoke. "You know what my career has hitherto been, though you do not perhaps know what has driven me to it. Shall I go back and live in that same fashion, and let Tretton go to the dogs? It will be so unless you take me and Tretton into your hands." "It cannot be." "Oh, Florence, think of it before you pronounce my doom." "It cannot be. I love you well as my cousin, and for your sake I love Tretton also. I would suffer much to save you, if any suffering on my part would be of avail, but it cannot be in that fashion." Then he scowled at her again. "Mountjoy, you frighten me by your hard looks, but though you were to kill me, you cannot change me. I am promised to wife of Harry Annesley, and for his honor I must bid you plead this cause no more." Then, just at this moment, there was a ring at the bell and a knock at the door, each of them somewhat impetuous, and Florence Mountjoy, jumping up with a start, knew that Harry Annesley was there. So they're going to meet. They've both gone down to Cheltenham, and they've met. They're going to meet. So this is the last bit of plot here. This is Mountjoy Scarborough throwing himself at Florence, saying, "If you will save me, I can be saved. And if you won't, I can't be." So naturally, this chapter flows into the next one. So I'll read the next one to you after this. I'll wrap this up, and we'll be right back. Thank you, BookTube.